Good evening, everyone. The November 30th, 2010 meeting of the Recreation and Education Committee will now come to order. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Gamble? Mr. Gumina? Miss Cayley? Here. Mr. Tucciarello? Here. Chairwoman Valerio?
Here.
Okay.
Is there anyone signed up for the public forum?
There is not.
Okay. Is there anyone present who would like to speak to the committee at this time? All right. I do believe we do have a presentation. And if Ms. Bennett would like to come. Okay, it's wonderful. Ms. Bennett is the Executive Director of the Rochester Museum and Science Center. And welcome, as always.
Thank you, Mary. It's great to see you. Did you all hear this before? The rosin on my hand, maybe. This is simply a large violin string. And we teach science like this in classrooms every chance we get, because we think kids need to be excited about the fact that metal has wavelengths and can make sounds of all sorts. So I welcome this opportunity to speak to you, to talk to you about the support that Monroe County gives to the Rochester Museum and Science Center. It's very vital to us. And some of you heard me talk about this last night, and I'm going to be just a little bit repetitive to make sure that you know what happened in 1968. 1968, the city, of which we were an agency, said to the county, we think it would be good if we paid attention to the city residents who need our support, and we would like the county to take over the services for the museum, the library, and the zoo. And at that point, our trustees of the Rochester Museum and Science Center said, how about we become a public-private partnership so we can be with you in this whole endeavor? And so that's how we became that way, as part of a county-funded partnership. And over the years, that the funding that we've received from Monroe County has been higher, but it's never been lower. But we understand that $900,000 is a magnificent sum of money in this day and age. At one point, it was as high as $1.5 million, and at other times it was even $2 million. It was 80% of our budget in 1969. Now it is less than 15% of our budget. So we multiply the dollars that the county gives us, and it enables us to care for the collections. We have 1.2 million objects in our collection that are technically owned by the city, cared for with funding from the county, and we serve. You know, the educational mission has become what is most important to the people of Monroe County over the years. Teachers come on field trips. We make possible for 12,000 kids and their families to come in from community-based organizations for free. And we have started a field trip and bus admission fund for school classes. And this exists now for all the Monroe County schools as well as the city schools, because there's been so much budget cutting to the county school districts that the kids in Fairport, the kids in Spencerport aren't able to get here for their field trips as they used to. So we want to make sure that's possible. So that's what we're working on, and making sure we gave 2,000 free admission passes to the Monroe County Youth Bureau last year. And always we are striving to serve and to make sure that we're doing what the county needs. You know about our Water Education Collaborative that we're helping to get out the word about how to keep our most precious resource of water clean. I'll be glad to take any questions. You know that in the future, 2 out of every 5 jobs in Rochester is going to be high tech. If the kids don't get interested in science now, we won't have the people to work in the businesses. So because we are an informal learning organization, we are the kind of place that no one needs a degree to come in, and you can learn at your own level. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The next item on the agenda is the proposed 2011 Monroe County budget. Will Scott Adair please come forward, and I will move.
Thank you, Chairwoman Valerio. I appreciate the opportunity to present this evening the Monroe County Executive's 2011 proposed budget for the county. Again, as we've talked about in previous committees, we'll give a brief overview of the entire budget, and then we'll go specifically into the areas that are overseen by this particular committee, Recreation and Education. The 2011 operating budget as proposed at the present time is $931 million, $931.7 million. That's an increase of approximately 1.9% over the prior year's operating budget of $913.9 million. That budget, the operating budget, is broken down into 4 categories. Those 4 categories are mandated, non-mandated, debt service, and non-mandated user fee supported. In the mandated category, those appropriations are up 3.7%, and they include items such as the payment to our sharing partners to make them whole for sales tax, the Department of Human Services increase of approximately $5.5 million based on an increase in caseload. We'll hear more about that in the next committee after that presentation. And the last piece of the major increase in the mandated services is the increased cost for retirement expense this year. The non-mandated services up approximately 0.9%, below the rate of inflation of 1.1%, approximately $900,000. And ultimately what that boils down to is what I will refer to as a lot of cost of living increases for not only salaries, but just COLA adjustments for supplies and materials and so forth. Debt service is down approximately 10%. That's a combination of factors. We're still seeing some benefits from a refinancing that we did in 2008. In addition to that, we're also seeing in some of the new debt that we've issued some of the lowest interest rates the county has been able to obtain in the long-term debt market in quite some time. And finally, the non-mandated user fee supported area is a decrease of 0.3% from the prior year. The non-mandated user fees area covers not only the airport, Pure Waters, the hospital, which will be covered this evening in Human Services, and the Solid Waste Fund. Those 3 funds, the airport, Pure Waters, and Solid Waste, will be covered tomorrow evening in the Environmental Pure Waters Committee. Turning to the operating budget and where the money actually goes to by functional area, again, this evening we're going to focus on the 5.3% piece of this pie going to the Recreation and Education functional area. Other areas in here include the public safety budget, which we went over last night, which is 21.2%. And then we also went over a small portion of the other budget, the 5.1%. As we get through the committees this evening, we'll also touch upon Human Services, and then the other three items will be covered in later committees. Where the money comes from to balance this budget, ultimately approximately 38% comes from property taxes. The property tax levy this year will increase by 0.9%, and that's all due to the assessment value rising in this particular county. That will generate approximately $2 million in new property taxes. The property tax rate remains flat at $8.99. Sales tax, we're seeing a significant increase from the prior year's budget, approximately 6.6%. As everyone knows, in 2009, we saw a significant drop-off in sales tax revenue across the state, including Monroe County, and we are starting to see some of the gains recouped from that period, but still far far surpassing where we would have thought we would have been as far as sales tax dollars go at this particular point in time. Again, the other items, one of the things I will point out to you here is the small sliver here of fund balance. We are using some fund balance in the Recreation and Education Committee. One of the departments is using, the library will be using some fund balance this year in order to balance its budget. And the other things will be covered in the other areas as we walk through them. Moving to the grants budget, the $176.7 million, up 1.7% from last year. This primarily deals with the human services area. That'll be talked about later on in the next committee meeting. There is a small portion, about $280,000 of a mandated grant that is in the Parks Department that helps fund the zoo vet and the horticulture program. Again, on the next slide, you'll see that small slice attained to the grant budget, the $278,000 that is part of Rec and Ed. On the next slide, we talk about the overall budget and the mandated versus non-mandated services. This year, the county's budget, 82% of every dollar spent in this county will be on a mandated service, 18% will be on non-mandated. Breaking those mandated expenses out by functional area, again, the predominant majority of those are in human services at 33.7%, and we will talk about this evening in this committee the Rec and Ed portion, which is approximately 24%, and that mainly deals with the MCC contribution as well as the contributions to the library systems. The non-mandated expenses by functional area, Rec and Ed is approximately 8.3% of that budget, of that total budget, and that primarily deals with the Parks Department. Moving into the slides that pertain directly to the Rec and Ed Committee and the Parks Department, one of the items that we commonly get questions on, we received them last night and we've received them in years past. Again, about 5 years ago when the county split the budget up into an operating and grants budget for accounting for the computer system that we now have, we deal with a lot of decreases in appropriations just due to the fact that grants have not been recognized at this point in time. The interesting thing about this slide, when you look at the park's overall expenses, you see a slight increase of approximately $500,000. The piece of it that is sort of not an apples-to-apples comparison is that in the 2010 $13.3 million, there's a $400,000 grant. So overall, the county's Parks Department's appropriations increased by approximately $900,000 with the exclusion of the grant piece. The grant could be recognized at a later point in time. The two driving factors in parks that make up this $900,000 are debt service, which is approximately $700,000 of the $900,000 increase, and employee benefits, which increased about 160%, the majority of that being in the health insurance area, and then a smaller portion being in the retirement area. Revenues are essentially flat, and again, you may be saying, why is that? The revenues would be flat. We've all read about the fact that we are increasing some fees in the Parks Department as far as the zoo goes and as far as some of the rental places go. Again, that is because of the fact that in the 2010 budget, as amended, is the grant revenue. So we need to exclude that grant revenue in order to compare it apples to apples. So you do see an increase in revenues from those things that we have anticipated increasing in the proposed budget, but they will ultimately equal themselves out as we move through the year. Next slide shows you some of the grant highlights, and some of these things are the reason why debt service is increasing in the Parks Department. A number of capital projects have been completed in the Capital Parks Department, in the Parks Department, not the Capital Parks Department. A number of capital projects have been completed by the Parks Department, and ultimately the debt now is coming due for those, and that's why we're seeing the spike in debt service, and a lot of those items are listed here. It's one of the reasons why we're able to continue to rent the facilities out that we do and continue to have what I'll call a distinct advantage from a supply and demand standpoint to be able to raise rates and still maintain full-time occupancy in those particular shelters. The next area in the Recreation and Education Committee is Monroe Community College. The largest portion of this $24.1 million appropriation has already been approved by this body. In August, you approved the MCC budget, which included a $16.7 million appropriation from the county as our county sponsor share. This appropriation also includes $3.1 million that we provide to other community colleges for students from Monroe County that attend a community college in another county. And it also includes $4.3 million of debt service on MCC-related facilities. Again, as everyone in this body knows, that every time we do something from a capital nature at MCC, it's 50% county funds, 50% SUNY funds, and ultimately we've been going through some slight decrease in the debt service, and that is due to not only the fact that we've the projects have been slowing down from one standpoint, but the interest rates that we've been obtaining in the refinancing that we did in 2008 have supported a decrease in debt service for that area. The next section of this particular presentation is the Monroe County Library System. We're providing approximately $3.9 million of almost $4 million of appropriations this year. The major items in this particular thing are agency contracts, all of which support the member library services across this county. The largest piece of this is a $2 million appropriation that's used to fund the central library to provide some of the services that are listed on this slide to the outlying suburban libraries. In the central library system, again, hats are off to the central library system as it celebrates its 100th anniversary in 2011. And we're showing here the appropriation that we're providing to the central library system, an increase of approximately $207,000. That $207,000 is ultimately a use of the library fund's fund balance this year. So the overall appropriation, with the exception of the fund balance, would remain the same as it has for the past 7 years, I believe it is. The last section of the... Oh, we're using $207,000 of fund balance in the library fund in 2011. The $6.6 million is the same funding source that we've provided in the last 7 years, I believe it is. And the $207,000 is on top of the 6.6. The final section of the presentation this evening is dealing with the cultural agencies in the county. We note here some expenses, some appropriations being provided to fund debt service for the cultural district. This is the last payment of this debt service, so this will go away in the 2012 budget. And we also provide a small appropriation of $9,000 for general tourism grants. And finally, the last slide here is one that received a lot of attention in the Planning and Economic Development presentation last night. This is the slide that normally you would see an appropriation, or in the past you would see an appropriation provided for. This year we have eliminated that appropriation, and we are providing the detail as to who will receive support, which is the same as it was in 2010 and the prior year before that, from the hotel motel tax, the $1.5 million that we provide to cultural agencies across this county. All of the agencies, once this budget is approved, will be provided this level of funding in 2011. And with that, that concludes my presentation, and we'll be more than happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Adair. Before we move on to the question segment, though, I am remiss in not having introduced Mark Quinn, who is the wonderful sponsor of our floral display. I didn't see it, that's why, until I went around. So he'll give us a quick introduction.
Just take a second. The plant of the month this month appropriately is poinsettia. We've got a display here that was grown at the Monroe County Jail. They're all grown in-house, and we're putting in a display today in Lamberton Conservatory. We'll have over 1,000 on display, and we'll be open with that display on Friday. Poinsettias are originally from Mexico. They're actually a perennial shrub. They can grow up to 15 feet tall. They bloom year after year, and they can be held from year to year. As a matter of fact, the white one here was held from last year. They get bigger, obviously, over time. Few misconceptions about them. They're not poisonous. They're not going to hurt your cats or your kids. You'd have to eat an awful lot of them to really cause you anything other than a stomach ache. They do have a white sap, and some people are a little bit sensitive to that. It's kind of a latex-type sap, but overall they're a safe plant. They're also the most popular plant grown as a flower in the United States. It's the #1 plant in the market, so they're a huge market, and the United States is the biggest producer of them. There's over 100 varieties available to the public. The original ones were the reds, but since then people have developed all sorts of variegated plants and white ones and pink ones, and there's a lot of really nice plants out there. So, any questions on poinsettias? Super.
Thank you. They're lovely. Okay. That being said, any questions regarding, I think that's, boy, looking at me with, okay, Mr. Nina.
Through you, Madam Chair, to the administration. Mr. Adair, you talked about the fund balance for the Central Library, and you mentioned that you had to tap into that fund balance for $207,000. Is that fund balance? I take it it's a library fund balance. This is not it's not part of the county coffers.
Through the chair, that's correct. It is a library-specific fund balance, yes.
Okay. Through you, Madam Chair, so it was their decision to basically use or to book that $207K as a revenue for 2011?
Through the chair, it's funds that have accrued to the county's library fund to use as the county sees fit. We've provided that fund balance to the central library system as part of our contribution to them.
Okay. Through you, Madam Chair, do we contribute to their fund balance every year?
Through the chair, I guess each year you'd have to look at it and determine the results of that particular operating fund, and the library fund is its own separate operating fund inside the county. So the fund balance has been up and down over the years. Right now it's at just roughly speaking, about $1 million. So we're using about 20% of that.
Okay. And through you, Madam Chair, last question. The $207,000, is that going to be, this is going to a silly question, but is it used next year? Are they going to use that money for operations or to help with the deficit?
Through the chair, the anticipation is that they will use that for operations to help offset any additional costs that they may incur internally.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
Any further questions? Ms. Kayla.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through the chair, back to the fund balance. I don't think I quite understand how the fund balance gets funded, specifically in terms of the library.
Through the chair, what's happened over the years is the library hasn't spent the total allocation that you, as a legislative body, have authorized us to provide them. And so ultimately, in the $6.6 million that has been authorized, we'll just say in 1 year they may use 6.4 of that. Those monies set aside in the library fund and accrue. And at this point in time, the numbers have kind of been all over the place. I went back as far as 2001, where it was about $150,000, and has kind of grown and then come back down and then grown again over the years. So it ebbs and flows as the need from the library system is required at this point in time.
Thank you. So unused funds, I find it ironic that they wouldn't find a way to use them every year, but that's not a question. But I do have another question, if I may, through the chair. Part of the objective was to establish a revenue-generating sponsorship through the MCLS website. This is on page 108. And my question is how this would happen in the first place, who would be in control of the process, and where would these funds go? Would they go into the fund balance if they weren't spent, or do they go to library fund, or do they go to a general fund within the county's discretionary fund?
Through the chair, we'll have someone from the library address that question.
Thank you.
We welcome Mrs. Utaro. You may step to the mic.
Through the chair, the library intends to use that money as revenue throughout the year. The plan that we have in place right now is to develop web sponsorships from various organizations throughout the Rochester region. We've been modeling the plan on something that WXXI does right now. We've benchmarked what we plan to do against what some other library systems in the state are doing, where they're realizing as much as $60,000 to $80,000 a year in revenue from selling sponsorships. What we're looking at doing is placing sort of a placeholder on the front of the MCLS website that would take you into a sponsorship page. And the idea there is that the organizations that would sponsor us would pay for that exposure. The MCLS website logs close to between 5 and 6 million visits a year. So it's a broad audience that we think will appeal to a number of organizations locally. We're getting ready to roll out the rate card and the whole process January 1st.
Correctly, then the funds that are generated through this would be discretionary funds for the central library?
They would be logged as revenue, as total revenue for the library.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Thank you, Mrs. Utero. Any further questions?
Did you?
Okay. Ms. Caden?
I'm sorry, I didn't know if
Well,
I had my
haven't
head
seen it
down,
yet.
so I don't know. Go ahead. Oh, okay. Thank you. Through the chair, if back up to the with the MCC, I noticed on page 103 of MCC that the parking fees, just the revenue is expected to go up. Do we have a figure that accounts for this increase?
Through the chair, it's actually two items. It'll be the first full year of the increased parking fee that was passed by this body last year, as well as the increased attendance will generate additional parking permits issued by the college.
And through the chair, thank you. Do you have a percentage increase in attendance that you're basing this on, or?
Through the chair, I believe the percentage that we've been told at this point in time is approximately 9.7%, and that could be larger next year. It will depend on enrollment at that point in time.
All right, thank you. And one more, if I may. I've just lost my spot here.
So you're not in my line of sight, so I have to look for
I
the hand.
know, I'm like, I keep looking down anyways, I'm sorry. Over to the cultural and other agencies, under, since most of the figures are the same from last year to this year, under the mid-size art support, could I get an explanation as to who these mid-size arts organizations are and how it was applied last year, and would it be applied the same year, or how that is done?
Through the chair, we can get you the detail on it as to what was provided last year, but ultimately we provide the $45,000 to the Arts Council, and they determine how to divvy it up from there. But if you do require the details as to who got what, we can ask them for that.
Actually, thank you. Through the chair, that explains everything. That answers the question, I guess. Is this mid-size art support then always distributed through the Arts Council? And if so, in the document, why aren't we labeling that as the Arts and Cultural Council?
Through the chair, I guess we're going to have to get back to you with more detail on that. There's some confusion over on our side to answer this question off the top of our head right now.
Okay, thank you. That's it.
That's it? Any further questions? there being none, we'll move on to the approval of the minutes. You have the October 26, 2010 minutes before you. They will stand approved unless the clerk is notified of any changes by the end of the day. Are there any other matters to come before this committee? There being no further business, the November 30th, 2010 meeting of the Recreation and Education Committee stands adjourned. The next meeting of the Recreation and Education Committee is scheduled for Tuesday, January 4th, 2011 at 5 o'clock. Thank you.